Beyond the Stars. A Journey of Hope. Through the neural link of his vessel, Zoran felt every crystal of frozen gas drifting past the dark planetary body at the edge of the solar system. His consciousness extended through the craft's sensor web, granting him spherical awareness no organic eyes could achieve. Where Windows would have imposed needless limitations, the interface allowed him to experience the cosmos in its boundless expanse, every radiation pulse and magnetic fluctuation as distinct as color. The vessel itself was compact, barely larger than the transit pods his people used for local flights. Its pearlescent hull curved in organic patterns that echoed the flowing architecture of the Nylari, though its once pristine surface now bore the scars of an extended journey. No external illumination marked its outline, unnecessary when the pilot could sense every micrometeorite impact and temperature shift through direct neural communion. Zoran himself floated suspended in the craft's central chamber, his slender frame buoyed by protective gel that shielded him during high-acceleration maneuvers. His pale azure skin, evolved for the filtered light of his homeworld's twin stars, appeared almost luminescent against the soft glow of life support systems. His 4 graceful limbs drifted with the gentle currents of the suspension fluid, each ending in delicate digits adapted for precision work. Unlike the massive, fur-covered Voltraxians who had conquered his species, the Nylari had evolved for perception and dexterity rather than raw power. The first indications of human presence appeared in his sensor feed, ancient mining operations on the frozen planetary surface that surpassed the finest Nylari engineering. Geometric configurations stretched across icy plains, their purpose unclear but their coordination unmistakable. Zoran recorded everything, each detail flowing into his vessel's memory through the neural connection, though the effort intensified the throbbing in his head. The interface wasn't designed for such prolonged use, but he couldn't risk missing anything that might help save his people. As he traversed the gas giant's orbit, more evidence accumulated. Automated probes, so advanced they nearly escaped his detection, maintained vast arrays of scientific equipment in the planet's upper atmosphere. They disregarded his presence entirely, focused on tasks whose purpose he couldn't begin to fathom. Around another massive world, he discovered similar machines, their movements suggesting they had been performing their duties without interruption for centuries. The ringed gas giant held structures that defied his understanding, gossamer thin sheets of material that appeared to harvest energy from the planet's magnetic field. They extended for vast distances, yet possessed less mass than a single Nylari vessel. The largest planet's radiation zones contained networks of satellites that seemed to be conducting experiments on a planetary scale. The terraformed colony struck him the hardest. Here at last were clear signs of habitation, or rather, abandonment. Vast cities stood empty beneath the rusty sky, their architecture unlike anything in his species database. They showed no evidence of conflict or catastrophe. They had simply been left behind, preserved like museum pieces by automated systems that continued their work across eons. Hope began to fade in Zoran's heart. He'd crossed half the galaxy chasing stories of humanity's power and benevolence, tales of a species that stood above all others yet used their might to protect the vulnerable. Every spacefaring race knew the legends, how humans had ended wars between elder species, uplifted young civilizations, and maintained peace across thousands of light years. But where were they now, when his people needed them most? The blue planet appeared in his sensor range, a jewel that stopped his hearts. The cradle of humanity gleamed with pristine beauty, its atmosphere clearer than any inhabited world he'd ever encountered. But as his vessel drew closer, despair replaced awe. No orbital stations cluttered the space around the planet. No ships moved between the blue world and its satellite. The only artificial structures he could detect were climate regulation satellites and what appeared to be wildlife monitoring systems. Humanity's homeworld had become a nature preserve, protected and maintained, but no longer inhabited. Zoran's despair transmitted through the neural interface, causing his ship to drift slightly off course. The Voltraxians would continue their expansion. His people would remain enslaved. The final hope of the Nylari race had led him to emptiness. Space rippled. The first vessel appeared directly ahead, its stealth field dissolving like mist in sunlight. Another materialized to his right, then his left, then above, below, behind. Within moments, thousands of craft surrounded him, their weapon signatures illuminating his sensor feed like a stellar nursery. You have entered protected space. The communication bypassed his vessel's array, speaking directly into his mind through the neural interface. I am Nexus. Identify yourself and state your purpose, or you will be eliminated. Through the interface, Zoran could sense the targeting systems of every vessel locked onto his position. Each one could vaporize him before his neural impulses could even register the attack. The weapons alone spoke of technology centuries beyond his people's capabilities. I am Zoran of the Nylari people, he managed, his thoughts carrying his voice. I seek humanity's help, please. The Voltraxians. Your species is unknown to us, Nexus interrupted, and this sector is explicitly restricted from all non-human traffic. The consequences for violation are absolute. More vessels appeared, filling every possible escape vector. Zoran's terror transmitted through the interface, causing his small craft to tremble slightly in the void. The neural connection that made his vessel feel like an extension of his body now ensured he could feel death approaching from every direction. Please, he tried again, pushing his desperation through the link. My people are suffering. We heard the stories, everyone has, about how humanity helps those in need, about their ancient power. His vessel drifted closer to the blue planet, though he hadn't intended to move. We didn't know where else to turn. A pause followed, during which Zoran felt the weight of calculation beyond his comprehension. The vessels hung in space like suspended stars, their presence both beautiful and terrifying. Your neural patterns indicate truth, Nexus announced finally. However, entering this space remains a violation. If you cannot provide a compelling reason for your presence here, the default response is termination. Through the neural link, Zoran transmitted images, massive brown-furred Voltraxian warriors twice the size of his people, energy weapons that cut through their best defenses, orbital bombardments that turned cities to glass, his homeworld conquered, millions dead or enslaved. The stories say humanity protects the weak, at least their homeworlds, he said softly, that they're the apex predators of the galaxy, but they use their power to help others. Please, are they still here? Can they still help us? Another pause stretched longer this time. The weapons remained locked on him, but Zoran sensed a shift in Nexus's attention. The intelligence was processing something vast, consulting protocols or databases beyond Zoran's understanding. Your reason is noted, Nexus said finally, and your neural patterns continue to read as truthful. However, you misunderstand the situation. The blue planet is not humanity's current residence. It is a preserve, protected in perpetuity as the cradle of their species. Zoran's hearts nearly stopped. Then they're gone. Extinct. The response came with what felt almost like amusement. No, humanity is very much alive. They simply no longer require physical planets for habitation. A new sensation filtered through the neural link. Curiosity, perhaps. Would you like to meet them? The question hung in space like a lifeline. Zoran's neural interface transmitted his mixture of fear and hope, causing his vessel to drift minutely forward before the automated systems corrected its position. The fleet surrounding him remained perfectly still, their weapon signatures unwavering. Yes, he whispered through the link, his mental voice conveying both his desperation and wonder. Please. The vast consciousness that was Nexus seemed to expand through the neural interface, its presence filling Zoran's awareness like an ocean compared to his small pond. The sensation wasn't invasive. Rather, it felt like being granted access to a greater space, as though a door had opened to a room he hadn't known existed. Your vessel's neural interface is primitive, Nexus observed, but compatible enough for basic communication. I will assign a subconsciousness to guide you. Maintain your current position. The weapon lock from the surrounding vessels disappeared, though they remained in formation. Through his sensor array, Zoran watched as they began to shift, creating a corridor in space that pointed away from the blue planet. A new presence touched his mind, gentler than Nexus's vast awareness. The promised subconsciousness. This way, it guided, and Zoran felt his vessel respond almost without his input. The neural interface translated the intelligence's direction into pure intuition, making the complex series of burns and course corrections feel as natural as walking. They accelerated away from the blue planet's orbit, passing through the fleet like a small fish through a school of much larger predators. "Where are we going?" Zoran asked, watching the blue sphere diminish behind them. "Where do humans live if not on planets? Humans exist primarily in simulated worlds of their own creation," the subconsciousness explained, its voice transmitting subtle harmonics that Nexus hadn't, making it feel more personal. Their physical bodies are preserved in stations orbiting long-lived stars, where the stellar life cycle provides the most stable long-term energy source. The concepts staggered Zoran. They abandoned their bodies. Amusement colored the response. No, they maintain their physical forms and occasionally return to them for various purposes: creation of new technologies, defense of protected spaces, aid to allied species. A pause. And also reproduction. Humans prefer to raise their young in the real world, though they have long since mastered virtualization of consciousness and artificial gestation. They were accelerating faster now, far faster than Zoran's vessel should have been capable of. Through the neural interface, he sensed subtle modifications being made to his craft's systems, optimizing them beyond their design specifications. The stars began to shift as they achieved velocities that would have been suicidal without the intelligence's guidance. "Why maintain physical bodies at all?" Zoran asked, fascinated despite his underlying fear and urgency, if their simulated worlds are so perfect. Humans believe that maintaining connection to their physical origins is crucial to maintaining their humanity, the subconsciousness replied. They don't want to lose their connection to biological life, and believe they cannot truly understand or protect it without remaining part of it themselves. The journey continued in silence for a time as Zoran absorbed this. His sensor array, enhanced by whatever modifications the intelligence had made, showed him wonders he could barely comprehend. Vast networks of automated systems maintained the space between worlds. Clouds of nanomachines refined asteroids into pure elements. Entire comets were shepherded into new orbits for purposes he couldn't begin to guess. There are three primary reasons humans choose to wake physically, the subconsciousness continued, apparently sensing his curiosity and his need for a more detailed explanation. First, when they wish to create something new, they believe physical interaction with reality provides inspiration that simulation cannot fully replace. Second, when warrior species violate protected spaces and require direct intervention. And third, when allied species require aid that cannot be provided through automated systems alone. Zoran's heart beat faster. "And which category does my request fall into?" "That remains to be determined," the intelligence replied. "But Nexus has judged your case worthy of human attention. That alone is significant." When they finished their journey, a new star was growing in Zoran's sensor feed, a dim red dwarf barely bright enough for organic eyes. But around it orbited structures that defied comprehension. Stations larger than cities spread in geometric patterns that seemed impossible, energy patterns transmitted between them in ways that might have been communication or might have been art. "Human bodies are preserved here?" he asked, his voice small in his own mind. "Some of them, those who wish to remain closer to the blue planet. Others chose stations around different stars, spreading themselves through the galaxy." The subconsciousness guided his vessel toward one of the smaller structures, though smaller was relative, as it was still larger than any space station Zoran had ever seen. "Nexus has arranged for you to meet with one human who recently chose physical awakening." Recently. The word caught in Zoran's thoughts. How long do humans usually stay awakened? It varies. Some maintain physical form for years when working on complex projects. Others wake only briefly to handle specific situations. The one you will meet has been physical for several lunar cycles, overseeing the development of new biological preservation protocols for their homeworld. They were close enough now that Zoran could see the station's surface in detail. What had appeared solid from a distance revealed itself as a constantly shifting maze of geometric shapes, the entire structure reorganizing itself moment by moment. His vessel approached what seemed to be a docking bay, though it looked nothing like any he'd seen before. "I will need to adjust your neural interface," the subconsciousness informed him. "The station's environment is optimized for human biology, but compatible with your own. However, you will need enhanced processing capacity to interact with its systems." Zoran felt the changes begin, subtle at first, then building in complexity. The neural interface expanded, granting him awareness of systems within systems, layers of reality he hadn't known existed. The station wasn't just reorganizing itself, he realized. It was alive in its own way, constantly evolving to meet the needs of its inhabitants. "Are you ready?" the subconsciousness asked as the docking bay opened before them, its walls flowing like liquid metal. Zoran checked his vessel's readings one final time, more from habit than necessity. "Yes," he said, and felt the truth of it in his mind. "I am ready to meet a human." As he conveyed those words, the docking bay enveloped Zoran's vessel like a living thing, its walls flowing around the craft in patterns that seemed to defy physics. Through his enhanced neural interface, he could sense layer upon layer of security systems, scanning every part of his vessel's structure. The station's awareness felt different from both Nexus and the subconsciousness, less personal, more architectural, as though the entire structure was a single vast machine dedicated to maintaining optimal conditions for its inhabitants. "Your vessel will be held in suspension," the subconsciousness informed him as the liquid metal walls completed their embrace of his ship. "You may disconnect from the neural interface. The station will provide direct environmental support." Disconnecting felt like losing a sense he'd always had. The suspension gel drained from his chamber, leaving him feeling vulnerable and small. Without the interface, he was just himself again, a slender, blue-skinned being far from home, about to meet a creature out of legend. The walls of his vessel dissolved, or perhaps folded away. His perception couldn't quite parse the geometry of it. He found himself standing in a corridor that seemed to breathe, its surfaces moving with subtle patterns that might have been art or might have been information. The air was perfect, neither warm nor cool, with just the right mixture of gases for his biology. A humanoid figure waited at the end of the corridor. At first, Zoran thought it must be another AI construct, its silver-white surface reflecting the corridor's patterns. But as he approached, he realized it was a synthetic form, its shape clearly designed to approximate human proportions while remaining obviously artificial. "I am Nexus's physical avatar," the synthetic said, its voice matching the vast presence he'd first encountered near the blue planet. "I will guide you to the meeting chamber. The human you will meet is called Ilara." Zoran followed the avatar, trying not to stare at everything at once. The corridor opened into larger spaces, each more incredible than the last. In one chamber, he saw what appeared to be artificial wombs, each containing a developing human child. In another, complex machinery worked on what might have been new bodies, though the purpose of the process wasn't clear to his understanding. "As I said before, humans prefer to raise their children physically," Nexus explained, noticing his attention. "The first few years of human development occur in biological form before they are given access to simulated spaces. It helps maintain their connection to their original nature." They passed through a security checkpoint that existed more in probability than physical space. Zoran felt the station's systems analyzing him at subatomic levels, verifying his identity and intentions through methods that made his perception spin. The architecture grew more organic, with surfaces that mimicked natural materials while retaining their fluid technological nature. "Why are there so few physical humans?" Zoran asked, noting the empty chambers they passed in a station this size. "Most of the space is dedicated to support systems, backup facilities, and emergency protocols," Nexus replied. "Humans learned long ago that concentrated population centers create unnecessary vulnerabilities. They spread themselves across many stations, many stars. It makes them virtually impossible to threaten as a species. If you attack one, the others will awaken." The concept struck Zoran with sudden force. His people had built cities, collected themselves as easy targets for the Voltraxians' weapons. Humanity had evolved beyond such weaknesses, becoming as distributed and resilient as the intelligences that served them. They entered what appeared to be a garden, though none of the plants were species Zoran recognized. The air here had a different quality, still perfectly breathable, but carrying scents that triggered profound responses in his biology. He felt simultaneously more alert and more at peace. "Ilara designed this space," Nexus said. "She believes that organic beings communicate best in organic settings. The plants are from prehistoric periods, recreated to match fossil records." The garden opened into a wider chamber that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially elsewhere. Its boundaries were suggestions rather than limits, and at its center stood a simple wooden table that was possibly the least artificial thing Zoran had seen in the station, precisely because of how natural it appeared. "She will join us shortly," Nexus said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "She is completing something she calls a morning ritual, though such temporal distinctions are largely arbitrary here." Zoran sat, his enhanced perception taking in every detail of the space. The wooden table reminded him of a simplicity that made the space feel more welcoming and real. The air currents in the room flowed naturally, and even the light seemed carefully crafted, its spectrum optimized for both human and Nylari vision. Soon, a new presence touched Zoran's awareness, not vast like Nexus, not architectural like the station, but deep and complex in ways he couldn't quite grasp. He turned toward the garden entrance as footsteps approached, his heart racing in anticipation and fear. The human who entered looked both exactly and nothing like what Zoran had expected. Ilara appeared to be female, with features that somehow managed to seem both young and ancient simultaneously. She wore simple clothing that might have been grown, rather than manufactured, and she moved with a grace that suggested complete mastery of her physical form. But it was her eyes that caught Zoran's attention. They held knowledge accumulated over centuries of existence, compassion born from an understanding of both biological and digital life, and power so effortlessly contained that it felt more like a force of nature than a living being or a machine. "Welcome, Zoran of the Nylari," Ilara said, her voice carrying a tone that Zoran's perception recognized as utter confidence. "Nexus tells me your people need our help." Ilara sat across from Zoran, with a fluid grace that made the simple motion feel a tier above the rest. The prehistoric garden around them seemed to respond to her presence, its alien flowers turning subtly toward her like satellites orienting to a star. Through his perception, Zoran could sense layers of technology so advanced they appeared magical. Ilara's biological form was clearly augmented far beyond anything Zoran had imagined possible, yet it all appeared perfectly natural. "Please," Ilara said, gesturing with one hand, "tell me about your situation. Nexus has shared the broad strokes, but I'd like to hear it directly from you." Zoran's throat felt tight, but he forced himself to speak. "The Voltraxians invaded our systems many cycles ago. His voice caught as memories surfaced. Cities burning, orbital bombardments turning the surface of his homeworld to glass. They're stronger than us, more advanced. We tried to fight, but they..." He trailed off, unable to continue. "Show me," Ilara said gently. "Your neural enhancement can share the memories directly." The images flowed from Zoran's mind without effort. Massive brown-furred warriors twice the size of his people, orbital stations falling from the sky in flames, millions fleeing into emergency shelters that prove useless against the Voltrexians' bunker-piercing weapons, the systematic destruction of everything his people had built. Ilara absorbed it all without visible reaction, though the garden's atmosphere subtly shifted, its patterns becoming more complex. "I see," she said finally. "And you came seeking us because of the stories." "Everyone knows the legends," Zoran replied. "How humanity reached the peak of evolution. How you stopped wars between elder species, uplifted younger ones. Some say you're gods. Others say you're the universe's immune system, defending life itself." He looked down at his hands. "We didn't know where else to turn." "We're not gods," Ilara said, amusement coloring her voice. "We simply reached our potential earlier than most species and learned some hard lessons about power along the way." She stood, moving to a point where the garden's boundaries seemed to fold into higher dimensions. "Walk with me." Zoran followed, noticing how the station's architecture flowed around them, creating paths moment by moment. "Are you an admiral?" he asked. "A military leader?" Ilara laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I've been an admiral, yes, countless years ago. I've been many things. Right now, I'm simply Ilara, and I'm happy to help." She turned to face Zoran directly. "We'll free your homeworld, of course. The only question is how to do it most effectively." The casual certainty in her voice made Zoran's heart skip. Just like that. "You'll help us." "Of course." Ilara's expression grew serious. "The Voltrexians have violated several principles we work to maintain, using overwhelming force against a weaker species. We don't interfere in wars, but homeworld invasions are not allowed by our laws." Her eyes seemed to look through multiple dimensions at once. "They need to learn that such actions have consequences." As they walked, they emerged into what appeared to be a control center, though it bore no resemblance to any Zoran had seen. The walls were transparent from the inside, showing the red dwarf star and its complex array of stations. Information flowed through the air itself, visible to Zoran's interface as intricate patterns of light and probability. "We'll take your vessel," Ilara said, surprising him. "It's been upgraded considerably since you arrived, and it will serve our purposes better than one of ours. The Voltrexians should see who brought us to them." "What?" Zoran looked around at the vast station, the incredible technology on display. "Wouldn't a human vessel be more powerful?" Ilara's smile carried echoes of ancient wisdom. "Just because we won't travel in a human ship doesn't mean I won't take one with us to your planet." She gestured, and a path appeared leading back toward the docking bay. "Shall we?" The journey back through the station felt different with Ilara present. The architecture responded to her as she walked, spaces opening before them and sealing behind them. Other synthetics or possibly avatars bowed slightly as they passed, their movements carrying subtle meanings Zoran's enhanced perception could almost grasp. They reached Zoran's vessel, its humble form now somehow strange. The modifications Nexus had made were invisible to normal sight, but to his interface, the craft practically screamed with new potential. The connection had been upgraded far beyond its original specifications, and systems he didn't even have names for had been integrated into its structure. "Your people built this well," Ilara commented, running a hand along the vessel's hull. "The neural interface design is elegant. We simply helped it reach its full potential." The docking bay opened to space, its liquid metal walls flowing aside like curtains. The red dwarf's light painted everything in its glow, making the station seem to burn with inner fire. Zoran felt a moment of pure awe, realizing he was about to travel with a being out of legend. Will you fit?" he asked suddenly, remembering the vessel's small size. Ilara laughed again. "Don't worry about that. I don't need much space." She gestured toward the entrance. "After you." Zoran stepped into his vessel and stopped, staring. The interior had been completely transformed. The neural interface beckoned to him, promising capabilities he had only begun to explore. "Reality," Ilara said from behind him, "is far more flexible than most species imagine. Shall we go help your people? Zoran moved to the pilot's position, feeling the enhanced neural interface embrace his consciousness like an old friend. Through it, he could sense Ilara's presence, vast and complex, yet contained. The vessel responded to them, both as the propulsion system activated. Yes, Zoran said, his voice firm for the first time since he'd begun his desperate journey. Let's go home. The journey back to Nylari space took far less time than Zoran's desperate flight had, though he couldn't quite grasp how the vessel managed it. Space itself flexed around them, distances folding in ways his mind struggled to comprehend even with the neural interface's improvements. Ilara sat in quiet meditation for most of the trip, her presence a calm center in the storm of physics-defying travel. They emerged from the final spatial fold above Zoran's homeworld. The sight struck him like a physical blow. Where once towers had reached toward the binary stars, now only ruins remained. The Voltraxians had transformed the planet's major cities into military outposts, their brutal architecture mocking the flowing designs of Nylari construction. Through the enhanced sensors, Zoran could detect his people living in crowded refugee camps between the destroyed cities. There, he said, indicating a particularly large Voltraxian installation near what had been his home village. That's the primary command center for this region. The local overseer coordinates slave labor from there. Ilara opened her eyes, studying the scene with calm interest. Many Voltraxian warriors in the immediate area, she noted. Would you like to watch how we handle this sort of situation? Before Zoran could respond, the vessel suddenly descended through the atmosphere. No alarms sounded, no defense systems activated. They might as well have been invisible. They landed in what had once been the village square, now transformed into a training ground for Voltraxian troops. The massive fur-covered aliens didn't notice their arrival at first. The vessel's stealth systems, Zoran realized, must have been operating on levels far beyond normal technology. He watched through the neural interface as Ilara stood, her movements still carrying that strange grace that seemed to contain her true power. Stay here, Ilara said kindly. Watch and understand why we choose to maintain physical forms. The vessel's entrance opened, and Ilara stepped out onto Zoran's planet. She looked absurdly small compared to the Voltraxian warriors, each of whom stood nearly twice her height. Their brown fur and massive builds made them look bigger and more threatening than Ilara. One of the Voltraxians finally noticed the human's presence. He shouted an alarm in their harsh language, raising an energy rifle that could have vaporized an Nylari instantly. The other warriors responded immediately, weapons appearing in massive hands as they moved to surround the apparent intruder. Ilara spoke, her voice carrying effortlessly across the square. Your species has violated several principles we maintain. You will withdraw from Nylari space immediately. The Voltraxian overseer emerged from the command center, his ceremonial armor gleaming. He towered over his warriors, a mountain of muscle and weaponry. He began to speak, then stopped as he got a clear look at Ilara. Something like recognition flickered across his ursine features. Who are you? I am human, Ilara said simply. You have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. The overseer's response was to fire his weapon, a shoulder-mounted cannon that could punch through starship hull plating. The blast crossed the distance between them instantly. Ilara wasn't there. Zoran's augmented perception could barely track the human's movement, even with the help of his vessel's sensors. One moment she stood calmly facing the Voltraxians. The next, she was beside their leader, moving with a speed that made light seem sluggish. Her hand touched the overseer's armor almost gently. The massive alien collapsed, his nervous system shut down by technologies Zoran couldn't begin to understand. The other warriors opened fire, filling the air with enough energy to melt a small building. Ilara flowed between the blasts like water between stones, each movement elegant. She touched another warrior, who fell, then another and another. In mere moments, all the Voltraxians lay unconscious in the dust. As I said, Ilara stated calmly, looking down at their fallen overseer, you will withdraw from Nylari space. She pressed her palm to the alien's forehead, interfacing directly with its neural implants. Your entire species will understand the consequences of violating our principles. The message is being transmitted now. Through his vessel's sensors, Zoran watched in awe as faster-than-light communications rippled out from the fallen Voltraxian, carrying Ilara's warning to every member of their species. The message contained not just words but complete sensory data of what had just occurred, and the clear understanding that this had been the gentlest possible demonstration of human power. How? Zoran's voice failed him. You didn't even use weapons. Ilara walked back to the vessel, her movements still carrying that impossible grace. These were just some nanites, she said casually. Don't worry about it. A smile touched her lips. And this was just the beginning. I see many more Voltraxian positions that need to be addressed. From high above, a shadow suddenly fell over the village square. Zoran's vessel detected something massive decloaking in orbit, a ship so large it turned day to night with its presence. More shapes began appearing in the sky, smaller but still impressive, thousands of autonomous drones and combat platforms, their designs unlike anything Zoran had ever seen. Ilara smiled slightly at Zoran's awe. I didn't even need to use the automated forces for this small group, but for a full planetary liberation. She gestured at the gathering armada above. We should probably make use of all our tools. The next few hours passed in a blur as Zoran witnessed a display of overwhelming force. Ilara coordinated the fleet with casual gestures, each movement triggering cascades of military action across the planet. Voltraxian strongholds faced simultaneous assault from forces that ignored their best defenses. Orbital platforms that had bombarded Nylari cities were disabled by drones that seemed to materialize inside their shield perimeters. Ground forces found their weapons transformed into inert metal by clouds of nanites. Through it all, Ilara maintained that same impossible calm, as though she were conducting a simple cleaning job rather than the liberation of an entire species. Your people can begin returning to their homes, she told Zoran as another Voltraxian fortress surrendered. The nanites are already beginning reconstruction of damaged infrastructure. When the Voltraxian leadership finally requested terms, they did so with a mixture of terror and awe that Zoran understood all too well. Their chief commander, a massive warrior whose ceremonial armor now bore scars from human weapon systems, could barely look at Ilara as they met on neutral ground. You will withdraw from all Nylari territories, Ilara stated simply. It wasn't a demand or a threat, merely a statement of fact. You will provide reparations for the damage caused, according to terms my automated systems are transmitting now. You will never again attempt conquest of another species. The Voltraxian chief snarled, his species' pride warring with his new understanding of the galaxy's true power structure. And if we refuse? Ilara's smile contained no humor. Then I stop holding back. What you've witnessed today was accomplished without involving actual human military forces. Would you like me to show you what happens when we decide to fight seriously? The chief's fur bristled, but his next words emerged as a desperate whisper. You mean this wasn't your military? No, Ilara said simply. This was a diplomatic response, a simple correction of unacceptable behavior. She gestured at the fleet of autonomous ships still visible in orbit. These are maintenance units, not warships. Please don't make me demonstrate the difference. The surrender took effect immediately. Within hours, Voltraxian forces began withdrawing from every part of Nylari space they had conquered. Automated human systems followed their retreat, ensuring compliance while simultaneously beginning the reconstruction of Nylari civilization. Zoran watched his people emerging from hiding, their faces showing the same mixture of disbelief and hope he felt in his own heart. I don't know how to thank you, he said to Ilara. Build something amazing, Ilara replied. That's how you thank us. Create art, music, science. Show us that we made the right choice in helping you. She smiled, and for a moment, Zoran glimpsed the profound age behind her eyes. That's what we protect, you see, not just life, but the potential for life to become wonderful. As Ilara prepared to depart, the Voltraxian chief approached Zoran with an awkward formality. Both of them watched the human vessel rise into orbit, where it would soon return her to her station around the red dwarf star. They stood in silence for a moment. Former conqueror and former victim, united in their new understanding of the galaxy's true order. "We didn't know," the Voltraxian chief said finally. "The stories, we thought they were exaggerations. Myths." Zoran nodded, watching the massive fleet preparing to depart, the automated systems already rebuilding his world. He stared back at the Voltraxian chief, too mystified to remember the hate he had felt, not even a spark of fear as he spoke. "They weren't myths," he said simply. "They were warnings."